Falcha, welcome back to our Saturday book. This is video number 3, A Spy in Plain Sight by Lis Wiehl, the story of Robert Hanssen, spy. And we're on chapter 16, First Blood. Democrat Senator Dennis Concini, I think, I'm sorry, was the head of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and he reviewed the Ames CIA case. He saw that the CIA failed to document and address Ames's alcohol problem, his affairs, his relationships with foreigners, his recent violations, his security violations, his failure to comply with regulations. They failed to monitor his Soviet meetings. They failed to investigate cases that he was involved in that were compromised. They failed to limit his assignments and his access after suspicions began. They failed to tell committees of losses caused by Ames. The director, Woolsey, deflected blame, CIA Director Woolsey, and ignored the fact, and he kept the FBI in the dark. The FBI was delighted by all this, happy to keep the CIA in the spotlight. And Congress, as a result of the Senate, passes new counterintelligence legislation. And all heads of departments must tell the FBI, if they're up to a problem, that the president is required to issue new and more rigorous access standards to classified information. Woolsey was replaced by John Deutsch, and he brought in all kinds of big changes. New managers in all the departments, priority computer security, performance standards were upgraded, new National Counterintelligence Center was formed at the CIA, headed by a senior FBI official. So the CIA was going to be monitoring itself, but the FBI was in charge of it. So that was the first time that they cooperated. The very opposite cultures. The CIA was Ivy League and wine. The FBI was State University and beer. They had been bitter rivals. This was a very odd marriage. They had to play nice, and it worked spectacularly well. Unexpectedly, spectacularly well. In 96, George Tenet, who is now the new head of the CIA, took personal interest to see that they would work together. He showed up when they were investigating things and helped to make things go smoothly and befriended the FBI guy and made things work well. A new squad was formed with Mike Rochford, MAGA, and the FBI to find other moles, and because they knew that they couldn't account for everything just by looking at Ames. There was more than what he had done. This was a mixed FBI-CIA investigative group. And 6 years later, Deborah Smithhead took over for Rochford. So they thought it would last a year, 6 years later. This was a new push to find the moles. In 96, Harold Nicholson of the CIA had been spying for 2.5 years. He was caught. He got 20 years. And from prison, he got his son to contact the Russians in Mexico City for money and give them information. So he got another 8 years, and his child got 5 years probation. Earl Pitts in the FBI had lots of classified information about Russians who turned. The IDs of the assets, when the Russian USSR fell, the Russians sold Pitts out to the FBI, and he got 27 years in prison. However, they knew that there was still someone out there. They couldn't account for some of the damage. KGB always confirms its information with a second mole, and they hadn't. So who was this? Was it Felix Bloch, who was in the U.S. Foreign Service that they never were able to pin anything on? He was in Austria. He had a problem with S&M, and he had hired a prostitute for $10,000 a year to engage in that. And he met often with questionable KGB assets. So the FBI investigated him. And guess what happens? Bloch is warned. The FBI can't get the proof that he's into espionage. Who warned Bloch? And they think that Hanssen told the Russians. Hanssen's last communication with the Russians was November of 2000, and it was snarky and arrogant, a letter that he wrote about Bloch. Bloch loses his State Department job, but he didn't get any jail time. Pitts made $250,000 spying, but he did very little for it. And the question now exists, was Pitts perhaps a smokescreen for Hanssen? The FBI and the CIA that know that someone is still out there is what this all boils down to. Chapter 17, and the winner is. They knew there was someone else, someone big. They had no idea who. Analysts even... he knew the analysts. He knew the events that were being done. He knew where the analysts were put. He knew the operations. He had access to 240 names. So they got lots of interviews going, and they started to polygraph people. Started to ramp up a focus on people on their list. They used other measures, security files, psychological profiles from a 3-person behavioral panel, medical and financial records. Inevitably, too, all of this is weighted towards what Mike Rocheford considers its 3 critical elements. And what are those elements? Well, first, that the suspect seemed to work CIA counterintelligence. Therefore, was that person in the CIA? Because other people did the same job. The suspect was probably involved in the Bloch case. He probably had access and helped the FBI with the Bloch case. And the suspect was able to give the KGB information to rebuild their counterintelligence program. So, the group would vote on the culpability of potential suspects. They narrowed it down from 50 to 34 to 17 to 1. This was someone who knew the Bloch case, had access to the information, lived in Virginia near the area the Soviets were operating. This was a guy called Brian Keller in the CIA. Hanssen was never on the suspect list. So they thought that the mole was Kelly, the CIA guy. In 2003, the Inspector General said that it was understandable that the focus was on Kelly. He did have ambiguous and suspicious behavior, which he didn't. The FBI was too committed to a belief it was a CIA guy. They lost their objectivity. They did not adequately consider other possibilities. They didn't question factual premises of the investigation. The investigation was poorly run, and the IG, Inspector General, conclusion was that it was a foregone conclusion from the very beginning that it was Kelly, and that they tried to make the evidence fit. The FBI had a huge blind spot. They could not believe an FBI agent would be crooked. They were blinded by institutional bias. They looked outward, and they honed in on the CIA guy, and they reinterpreted his history and his screenings to fit. So it's not that they found evidence, it's just they chose to look at what they had on him, had exonerated him before, and now it made him guilty. Kelly did have a big role in the Bloch case. The FBI said that the KGB let him give up Bloch to increase his standing in the CIA to cover himself. Anything can be twisted. He was trying to fit a glass slipper on a stepsister. The IG said that the FBI was trying to fit a glass slipper on a stepsister. The FBI denies it was unwilling to look within. We kept getting redirected by our leads to look at the CIA. Kelly's cases that had been compromised were often overlapping with the FBI. The Russians impacted the FBI operations in New York City. Kelly happened to be there too. The Inspector General compared all of this to the way that the Atlanta bombing was handled, and how Fried went after Richard Jewell and accused this poor innocent guy and ruined his life. Kelly's access mirrored Hanssen's, but it was painful for Kelly and his family. It ended up being really damaging that they pursued him. Part 4, Chapter 8, Whack-A-Mole. So, this woman, Patricia McCarthy, meets Kelly. They're both divorced. And it was an immediate attraction. And he has to tell her, yeah, I really like you and everything, but I'm under investigation as being the biggest spy of the 20th century. And she says, I knew that this man was not capable of this. He was a very Catholic guy. The center of his life was his faith, his family, and his friends, and that's what got him through. He was followed 24/7 for 4 years, and they found nothing. They decided it was him, and then they looked for evidence to support it. They didn't put facts first. The FBI would not take no for an answer. His house, his garage, his phone, all bugged. They followed him on trips. They decided to give him real information, put him in an operation about a top secret defector, and require a polygraph for the job so that they could get him on polygraph. The polygraph guy was told ahead of time, which is poor process. You're not supposed to... The polygraph guy is supposed to be neutral. His name is Ken, the polygrapher. Listen, Ken, we know this guy's going to fail this test because he's a spy, but we want you to tell him that he passed. So Ken says, I did. And Kelly leaves, and I look at his charts, and he did not fail the polygraph. He passed. I'll be honest with you, when I saw he passed, I said, oh shit, it was the best thing for him, but the worst possible thing for me, because I knew they weren't going to believe me. I have an option. Polygraph testing can be very subjective. You have to score the charts, give it a mathematical score, but a certain amount of interpretation goes into deciding whether something is a plus or a minus. I'm thinking I know this guy's a spy, and he should fail this test, so I better give this a minus or at least put it into my consideration. I am also thinking, dang it, he beat me. He beat my test. So I go back and I rescore everything again. I do it fresh, and he's still passing. So he gives the results of this good polygraph test, and the FBI doesn't believe it, and they throw it out. November of 98, they try another sting on Kelly. They send the guy with a Russian accent to his house, and it's just this weird encounter. And the guy says to him, it's a very weird encounter. I got a knock on my door, Kelly said. He says this to Leslie Stahl in 2003 on 60 Minutes. I opened it and there was a gentleman outside. He says to me, I come from your friends and we're concerned. Meet us tomorrow night at the Vienna Metro. A person will approach you. We have a passport for you and we will get you out of the country. So the next day, Kelly reported it to his boss. Oh my God. And they're assuming, a spy will flee, right? No, Kelly went to his boss. The FBI decided that this showed he was an Iceman and had no sense of guilt, that he had uncovered the ruse and wasn't afraid. Rochefort determined to see Kelly arrested. Kelly called it his Inspector Javert to my Jean Valjean from Les Mis. They decide to, they have no choice. They're going to have to interview Kelly. And they call him his code name, because they have to have a code name because they're all children, the Gray Deceiver. August 18th of 1999, they tell him, we know who you are. You're not under arrest, but Tenet wants you to have one chance to come clean. Then we'll put you under arrest. And Kelly says it's not long into the interview when the interrogators play their trump card. Kelly describes it. The senior bureau agent, Guerin, jumped up, opened his briefcase, slammed a piece of paper in front of me and said, explain this. And I looked at it, and it took me a moment to realize what it was. It was my jogging map, stamped secret. Right church, wrong pew. The map discovered during a Freedom of Information Act break-in at Brian Kelly's home. is a hand-drawn sketch of nearby park, and the park is central to the case the team is trying to crack. The mole has been using the park since 1985 as his go-to site for dead drops, and the FBI surveillance teams assigned to Kelly have noted multiple drive-bys of the park by Soviet agents. But in this case, 2 + 2 does not equal 4. Kelly uses the park regularly for morning runs, and the map they've discovered plots his favorite jogging routes, not any espionage hidey holes. This poor guy. They take his badge away, they walk him out, and he's not allowed to return to the CIA building for a year and a half. His daughter Erin, also in the CIA, is put on paid administrative leave. The two are interrogated. The lead interrogators are a guy called Guerin and a guy called Gregory, and they said they had nothing on Kelly. Rochefort insisted that they continue the investigation. He wanted them to do a destructive search of the house. In other words, they take out the drywall and the insulation and the roofing and the flooring. But they said no. The family had been under assault. His ex-wife, his sisters, their husbands. They even threatened to question his mother, who was in a nursing home, and it would have killed her. They pulled Kelly's son out of his office the day after his daughter was born. He thought it was a prank. He thought his friends were teasing him. They threatened his daughter, who was the agent. His other son was hounded. And this son told the CIA, people become spies for 2 reasons. They've been burned by an organization in the past, and it's revenge, or they need money, and that's not my dad. He's a decorated U.S. Air Force officer. He would not betray his country. So for the next couple of years, he woke up every morning expecting to be arrested, and the son woke up every morning expecting to see the arrest in the newspaper. His wife, Patricia, called it a shakedown. Now keep in mind, she's a prosecutor. She says, it was like a Mario Puzo movie. You can see it being made. It's all these simultaneous scenes, interviewing Brian's sisters, their husbands, the children. Then they threatened to go to his mother. It was vile. It would have killed her, and they got nothing from that. Nothing. Brian told me about the interview several weeks after we started dating, and I said, that's a shakedown. As a prosecutor, if you don't have anything, you go in with both barrels blazing. So he was bewildered. He was in emotional shock. The case went into suspended animation because they couldn't get anything on him. And then the final report said that there was nothing for the prosecutor to base a case on. They began a new operation called Pennywise. So now we're on chapter 19, called He's Back. Hanssen was trolling the computer system to discover the hunt, and he knew that Kelly was their focus. So Hanssen was watching the search for Hanssen and keeping a step ahead of it. And 184. I'm looking up the date instead of the page number. My God. According to the Inspector General's report on the case, although the FBI did not intend for documents related to this highly sensitive investigation to be uploaded into the computer system, because of widespread concerns about the system's security, many such documents were uploaded due to failures in training, simple human error, and insufficient concern about maintaining operational security. With the Bureau, the more things change, the more they seem the same, and the more advantage Hanssen takes of the situation. He monitored the investigation, and he told the KGB all the details. He had money woes again, and he was bored with his State Department job. He had nothing to do. He took a lot of long lunches. So he shows his State Department friend his car trunk one day, and he's got an FBI machine gun in there, a 9mm, and ammo that's waterproof, and he tells his friend, I could drive into the Potomac and come out shooting. Later, he admits he liked the excitement. He wanted the self-image. He actually got a sexual kick out of it. And he gets in contact with the KGB, and he asks for a $50,000 advance because he's got more info. And one of his jobs in the State Department is to physically carry highly classified documents between the State Department and the FBI. He could walk out of the building with any document. It's part of his job. And he gives them Kelly's name, hoping that the Russians will contact Kelly's friends and set him up. The KGB agrees, and they set up a dead drop, but for the money for Hanssen. But the Russians neglect to pick up the documents that Hanssen leaves for them. Several times they neglected. They get back in touch with him, and he suggests using, instead of all these ridiculous document drops, how about we use an encrypted Palm Pilot, a Palm 7 that the FBI has given him. So he has lots of letters to the KGB, and his behavior at work got worse and worse. In 93, that was the day that he attacked Lichtenberg. This was the day that after his dad died. So it seems like he was acting out when he had other pressures in other areas of his life. Major was no longer his mentor. He had left the FBI. Hanssen dropped by his new office. He had a civilian job in the summer of 2000 to visit Major, and Major said he looked awful. Jack had dinner with him right before he was arrested. Hanssen turned off the Prairie Home Companion on the radio in the car. They were singing America the Beautiful, but he thought that Garrison Keillor was a commie leftist, and he started ranting and raving to Jack about the evils of Prairie Home Companion. He said, "This is just sacrilegious crap. This left-wing suspicious person is on the show. It must be bad." Jack said, "I could tell he was under great strain at that point, but I put it down to his religious sensibilities. He thought Keillor was making fun of religion generally. This was not the Bob I knew as a kid." Bonnie had implied to Jack that Hanssen was under great stress, very tense and jumpy. Because this letter that he got from the KGB requested intelligence in order to take steps to ensure his personal security. The question is that's what's making him jumpy. He got a letter from the KGB warning him, you better be careful. We have reason to think that you better be careful. So in his letter that he wrote in response, he kind of implied that he felt he was under stress. And less than a week later, the FBI figured out he was the mole. So now we're on part 6, chapter 20, Pennywise. This was the operation that brought Hanssen down. And it began with Vitaly Yurchenko, the Russian defector. He was a KGB officer, and in 1995 he defected. He gave up 2 U.S. intelligence officials working for the KGB to get the Americans to help him. He went to the Soviet embassy in Moscow, and he was given the Order of the Red Star. So he came to the United States, said he was defecting, gave them the information, hung around a bit, and then went back to Russia and got the Order of the Red Star. What was he really up to? Nobody knows. The FBI and the CIA joined forces and offered many Russians $1 million to turn in the mole. They decided, okay, we've tried everything. Let's see if we can bribe somebody. So they contacted every Russian that they thought they might have an in with, potential vulnerability, and said, look, we'll give you $1 million if you tell us who this mole is. This is called Operation Pennywise, and they offered $1 million to over 250 people. However, they were still focused on finding proof that it was Kelly. Like, tell us Kelly's the mole, right? Finally, they found an art dealer, a Russian guy, former KGB. And he had information because he had been in the KGB. And he made a deal with them. He said, I'll give you the information I have for $7 million and resettlement in the U.S. and $750,000 of it in cash up front. The CIA agreed to put up the cash. The source missed a couple of meetings with them. they thought, oh my God, this would have been meeting with them in Moscow. And the CIA's thinking, okay, this is all baloney. We're back to square one. But it turns out that their source was afraid of the Russian mafia, completely independent of any kind of government spying or whatever, KGB or whatever. He'd run afoul of the Russian mafia because of a failed deal. They'd been transporting caviar and whatever this business deal was with the mafia, the caviar spoiled, and they wanted him to pay for it, and he didn't have the money. So he's hiding from the, make a movie, right? He's hiding from the mafia because he'd been the middleman in this failed caviar trade. So they got the documents. The CIA and the FBI realized that the KGB were aware they were investigating Kelly. And so they're thinking, well, can we trust their information if it implicates Kelly? Now we're worried. The Russians had given them all the documents that the mole had given the KGB. The Russians gave the CIA 6,000 pages of stolen secrets, letters between the mole and his handler, Cherkashin, all in Russian. So it had to be translated. While it was being translated, Hanssen was dumping information on the CIA, on the British and Australian sources, and this would have been the largest and most damaging of his career. He was collecting information for the next sale to the Russians. When the Russians successfully relocated, when the art dealer was successfully relocated. Part of the deal was, okay, I get the $750,000 up front, I give you the documents, you pay me the rest of the 7 point whatever million, and you relocate me to the United States, but I'm not giving you any information until I'm out of Russia. So as soon as he was successfully relocated, he provided more stuff besides these documents that were being translated. He provided them with the black garbage bags from the dump that the documents had been wrapped in. They had fingerprints on them. He provided them with an audio cassette of a 1986 phone conversation between the KGB and the mole. No one can identify the voice, but they know it's not Kelly. They know who it isn't, so it eliminates Kelly. Finally, November 16th, the translations are finished, and by the afternoon, they figured out it's probably Hanssen. Now that they have the mole, and they have him on audio too, telling the KGB that his friend Jack might be a good recruit. That's how they knew it has to be Hanssen, because Hanssen's best friend's name is Jack. The FBI agents know this, and they put two and two together, and they sat on it until the next day, and they told the rest of the team the next day, and Rochford exploded. He doesn't believe. He thinks it's still Kelly. And they won't have the prints until December. I don't know why it took so long. It's a couple of weeks. But they're able to dovetail Hanssen's movements and his cases with the mole activity and the spy product. The Gray Deceiver is closed on November 20th, and by the 21st they open a new case called Gray Day. The CIA is relieved. He said, we didn't think we could take another spy in our midst. They're just so grateful it's the FBI, they can hardly stand it. Rochford claims he's glad to exonerate Kelly, but he had a bad feeling that it was going to be the FBI. I don't know. I wouldn't trust Rochford as far as I could throw his MAGA hat. Before telling top DOJ officers, including Mueller, they required a polygraph and a non-disclosure agreement of all the top DOJ people in case there's a leak. And of course the lawyers all freaked out, and Mueller said, enough of that. Here, give me the non-disclosure. I'll sign it. You're all taking a polygraph. So they did. Then Rochford told the story of the money as a bait, the $1 million, and how they ended up paying way more than that, and the Russian asset who helped, the art dealer KGB guy. This was quite the story, and I just can't even... I see the movie starting out with them all sitting around with the Department of Justice people listening to this story unfold. Can you just see it? After after he hears the story, Mueller says, Mike, that's the most fantastic fucking story I've ever heard in my life. Chapter 21, Baiting the Trap. Now they know it's Hanssen, and they have some evidence. They've got fingerprints. They've got his voice on tape. They need more, or they have to catch him in the act. And I don't understand if they have his fingerprints, why they need more, but you know. So finally, Kelly's cleared. He's off the hook. But they keep him on home confinement and don't let him come back to Langley because they don't want the Russians or Hanssen to figure out that they know who he is. It has to be kept a secret still. They don't want them to know. So there's a negotiation back and forth. How long are we going to keep this poor guy on the hot seat, Kelly? They agree on 60 days, and then they take Kelly back into the CIA, but it took 3 months. Agents were not told. They had to keep it a secret, and Kelly was still being investigated. So it was the zombie case on life support is how they called it. The Freedom of Information Act through the Department of Justice was step 1. The judge didn't like the pursuit they'd done on Kelly, and now he was afraid this pursuit of Hanssen was more of the same. So he made a very high standard for investigating Hanssen. So the FBI had the prints and they had the audio and could show the timeline that he was in the right place and had the opportunity and tangible things. And they, were beginning to pile up. When they could put that chronology together, that was a huge help. Okay, so they couldn't bug his house because Bonnie and 2 children were still living in there and they were always home. So the FBI bought the house across the street and turned it into surveillance. I just can't even believe they did this. 30 phone lines. They searched his car, his Taurus. They found white tape and colored chalk that was used to mark the dead drops. They found 4 boxes of ledgers with classified information in the car. They found mailing tape and plastic garbage bags to wrap the things for the drops, and thumbtacks that were used as signals, everything that he used. Lots of suspicious behavior was recorded, drive-bys of the parks, visits to the drops. They're all documented. The FBI found money at a drop that the Soviets had put in the wrong place and Hanssen missed, so that was a help. But it's not a crime to drive by a crime scene, and the money could have been a drug deal that he was doing. So Hanssen had the clearance to have the documents in his car. That was the problem. So they had to catch him in the act, and they had to do it soon because he was retiring. They had to organize a transfer for him, a promotion for getting him into a better proximity and surveillance and giving him less access to secrets, but enough so that he had something to pass on so he wouldn't get suspicious. So what they've come up with is they decide to ask him to set up a computer network for the Russian department that the Russians would be interested in. And they built a wonderful office. They took in the headquarters, they took a big conference room and made an office, a 2-room office into it for his ego, but they totally bugged it. Then they set up a whole fake computer system, independent of any other computer system, but looking like it was part of the other computer system. So he really didn't have real information, and they fed him stuff. Then Eric O'Neill was hired as his assistant, who to spy on him. And they had to make it look like a real job offer in the newspaper and everything. So O'Neill saw that he's less than half Hanssen's age. Eric's never been an FBI agent. His specialty is foot and vehicular surveillance. And Hanssen is 4 inches taller than O'Neill and loomed over him. Their first exchange is gruff at best. O'Neill reaches out his hand and says, "Bob Hanssen, hello." And Hanssen says, "You can call me sir or boss." Idiot, moron, and dummy seem to be Hanssen's favorite word in describing most of his colleagues. Rich Garcia across the hall included. O'Neill will soon come to know better than Perhaps he wants Hanssen's stand on public morality, homosexuality, Jews, democratic politicians and policies, and on the other side of the ledger, prayer, Opus Dei, Catholicism, the NRA, the infallible virtue of OODA. I don't know what that is. A fighter pilot acronym. For observe, orient, decide, and act. The Russian intelligence services are good at it. Hanssen says the American intelligence services suck. Also spies. Hanssen has a lot to say on that subject. The spy, he says to O'Neill, is always in the worst possible place. Mostly, too, the spy is the worst possible person. Ames, for example, was a dumb, alcoholic drug addict who barely skated by. Then he said, I truly believe he wanted to tell somebody about his genius. This is O'Neill. We were getting closer and closer. If the investigation lasted 1 or 2 years, as some thought it would, he might even have come right out and told me he was a spy. The FBI came to believe Hanssen was recruiting me, Eric, to replace him as he was about to retire. Shades of Jack. And as with Jack, probably meant as an expression of friendship. To Hanssen's mind, this was the greatest thing in the world. The awesome secrets, the rush you get to play James Bond and get paid a ton of money. Who wouldn't love that? Hanssen put his hands on my shoulder, leaned his chest on my back as he bent over to look at my screen. I felt very uncomfortable. I think it was intimidation more than anything else. He liked to have the upper hand. So Hanssen expressed contempt for the FBI. Agents had a betting pool that who was going to get the best evidence against Hanssen to arrest him. So one day he forgot his Palm Pilot when he went out, and they were able to get it and copy it before he came back. They would intentionally have a couple of agents take him to a really far away shooting range, part of the job, and then they'd stop for a ridiculously long lunch and they'd stretch it out. I'll have a drink, I'll have dessert, I'll have coffee, to get him away from the office so that others could pull apart his car and his documents. They found his last letter to the Soviets, and he suspected he had been isolated and bugged in this new office. They needed him to make a drop, or they were going to have to arrest him. Chapter 22, Takedown. The violation of espionage has no statute of limitations. Anyone who is so stupid or narcissistic to believe they're smart enough to beat it, even someone like Hanssen, who never gave up his face to a camera, is wrong. Eventually, the FBI will get a source and will be able to get inside the files of our enemy and pull out enough evidence to get that person in jail. I don't care where you work. Don't spy. It's stupid. You're going to get caught. This is Mike Rochefort. So the weekend of February 17th to the 18th of 2001, his friend Jack visited Hanssen. He was edgy and upset. Hanssen drives Jack to the airport when Jack is going home, and he gives him a book by Chesterton, who is a big, popular writer of the Opus Dei. He was a priest. So the book is called The Man Who Was Thursday. It's a tale of deception, and Jack often wondered, was this some sort of obscure hint? So Bonnie is at home expecting Hanssen back from the airport at 6, but he has errands to do first. So she expects him around 6 and he never arrives. The family eats without him. Bonnie starts searching for him. His phone's off. She drives to the airport. And she's met in the parking lot by a team of FBI agents who tell her that he's okay, that he's been arrested for espionage at 5 o'clock. They don't tell her that they offered to let him call her, put her mind at ease, and he refused and instead called his lawyer. Did Bonnie have a premonition? She returned home with a squad of agents sobbing. Their 17-year-old son, Greg, was stunned when they all came in the room. They collected Hanssen's guns. Their 15-year-old daughter, Lisa, and her boyfriend returned in the middle of this. The agents booked the entire family into a hotel because the house is now a crime scene. All the FBI guys meet at Sunday, forming the arrest team, and they leave a team in the office as well. After the arrest, a guy called Bush in on the arrest calls free. A guy called Bush in on the arrest. President Bush calls free to thank him for catching the spy. The arrest was not in the media for 24 hours because they were waiting for the Russians to pick up the drop, and they didn't do it. Brian Kelly gets a call from his son, and he didn't answer his phone right away, and the kid is thinking they've arrested Kelly because he heard they arrested the spy, and he panics and calls his dad, and eventually he gets through to him and tells him it's over. They never told Kelly. They never got in touch with him and told him you're off the hook. On Sunday, Hanssen drops off Jack, heads to his spy drop, and then he's arrested. And it's all on film. You can see photographs, stills from it. And they say that Hanssen is at the drop in casual mortuary attire. So one of these special agents is still overseeing the takedown and cuffing when Hanssen throws out a line perfectly balanced between contempt for his employer of a quarter of a century and a cynicism steeped in gangster movies from the 30s. He says to the agents, "What took you so long?" A few minutes later, Gregory tells Hanssen, "Bob, this is a sad day for all of us." His reply is a direct quote from his letter to the Russians of less than a week earlier. Life has its ups and downs. And it's exactly the kind of thing James Bond might have said with a wink as Dr. No was preparing to turn him into nuclear waste. Part 7, Chapter 23, Collateral Damage. Hanssen had been delighted when Bush won, and conservative religious nuts like Rumsfeld and Ashcroft were in, until he got arrested and they were pushing for the death penalty. All of a sudden his opinion changed. If Hanssen started serving 10 years for all the 3 documents that were in the drop that he'd left, he'd be 87 years old when he was free. But execution is on the table. He served as a spy for too many years, and they can't get him for those things he dropped before. There's no proof. But they got him red-handed with the last drop. And they know he has a history, and they're not going to let him get away with it. His best bet is a brokered guilty plea. His lawyer told him, "You're going to fry." He was going to get 15 consecutive life sentences. He's sent to the Supermax in Florence, Colorado, and he has 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. That was the deal. But he had to be forthcoming, and they dangle Bonnie's future as the bait to get him to cooperate. He was debriefed 34 times. On the last time, he tried to slug the polygrapher. He failed the tests. Counterintelligence is able to suss out the truths. And with spouses, there are 3 factors, spouses of spies. They're either knowledgeable or culpable, or they cooperate. Bonnie 100% cooperated. They gave her immunity and his survivor's benefits, a pension of about $40,000 a year. They needed her cooperation. They needed to be okay with her to keep Hanssen talking. Bonnie kept teaching her Opus Dei job, and she's still married to Hanssen. His daughter spoke at the Oakcrest commencement. Now, Oakcrest is the girls' Opus Dei school. She spoke in 2013, 12 years after Hanssen's arrest as a spy. His daughter was invited to speak at the commencement of this school. And knowing what is right and good is not a rocket scientist, she said. She was then a professor of history in University of Dallas. Oh, one of my daughters went there. And she tells the Oakcrest seniors, "We know what is right. What is right is not the problem. Living it is the challenge." So, collateral damage. His wife, his 5 kids, Brian Kelly's wife, his ex-wife, his daughters and sons-in-law, his mother. The FBI never wrote him a letter of apology. He was disappointed. He had given his life to America, and it turned on him, and it was horrible. He died in 2011 at the age of 68 of a heart attack, and I.C. Smith says Kelly's dead today because of the way he was treated. Tennant said, "Yeah, there's a tragedy here. This was bad." Mark Walk Bonnie's brother, was informed at home. And he says to the guys that informed him, the FBI, he says, I suppose this is a result of what I told the supervisor all those years ago. And they all go, what? Mark had sent a letter to Mueller, and Mueller had responded in 2001, and there was no follow-up. The FBI painted Hanssen as a master spy rather than admit that they had too much hubris to investigate themselves. Mark finds out that the new agents that join are told, who knows if Walk is even telling the truth? So they're implying that maybe his whole family was involved to take a little of the heat off themselves. Lyle is mad that he's accused of dropping the ball. He sees the report of the investigator, the special investigator, and is amazed how much suspicion his extended family, Hanssen's extended family, had for years, including Walk. Major still says Hanssen gave no signs and there were no red flags. After 23 hours of solitary confinement for 20 years, Hanssen is a zombie. He doesn't speak in coherent sentences. He's almost catatonic. But the question they all ask, is this real or is he faking it? Nobody can tell. Jack did attend the sentencing, and it's the last time that he ever saw his best friend. Only a few months before Hanssen's arrest, Jack came across a quote from E.M. Forster that stuck with him. If I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friends, I hope I should have the guts to betray my country. Jack told me, I understand the reasoning behind that. I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, and if I had suspected, like his brother-in-law, that Bob was a spy, I'm certain I would have held to the oath. But reporting him would have been very, very hard. For me, that's a dilemma that goes almost to my core. I'm really happy I never had to make that decision. So chapter 24, The Mind of a Spy, and this is really interesting. According to a 2001 study of 150 U.S. citizens who were arrested as spies, I'm going to give you percentages. I'm just going to run through as fast as I can because this is long and I want to fit this into, this is the last video. We're almost done. 93% male, 95% hetero, 84% white, 60% volunteered to spy, over 50% married, over 50% drank to excess, 50% were uniformed military, 57% were younger than 30, 1 out of 10 was an officer. Many did it for drug money. 42% were government contractors or civilians. They usually were older than most spies, half of them over 40, and they were better educated. 1 out of 7 had graduate degrees and much greater access to secrets. 15% had top secret clearance. They earned far more for spying, and they lived beyond their means. Why did they do it? More than half said they did it for money. A quarter said they were angry and wanted revenge at their employer. A little fewer than a fourth did it for ideological or cultural affinities with those for whom they spied. 16% were recruited by family or friends. 12% did it for the thrill. 4% needed to be recognized and to feel important. Hanssen was younger, 33. He had James Bond-itis as a kid. He had a huge ego, dare I say narcissist. He had a very low opinion of others, especially the FBI. He did not live beyond his means, and he did not share ideological beliefs with the Soviets. He was an outlier. He is considered the intelligence community's Unabomber, unable to connect, difficult socially, a lone terrorist. Mike Sulek, in the counterintelligence division, the head of the CIA division, said that Hanssen was an outsider in the FBI. He wouldn't go with the guys to a strip joint, but he did go alone. And he met with a stripper and had an affair and let her use his credit card. And Sulek said, a lot of spies are sickos. Ames, Walker. Hanssen was a wacko. How his dad treated him is a big thing. There's a long history of spies with very abusive fathers, starting with Benedict Arnold. Anyway, he's been an outsider from his birth. He became a staunch Roman Catholic. That wasn't enough. He became Opus Dei. That still didn't satisfy him. He joined the most exclusive club of all, the I Work with the Enemy Intelligence Club. He controlled it, even the Russians. Money was part of it, but he could have demanded more. He said, I want something exclusive I can control mixed with revenge. They think I'm a weirdo. I'll show them. I'm smarter than all of them. He didn't say it out loud, but this is what's going through his head. He's been studied by psychiatrists. In the Journal of Forensic Psychology Practice, two called Sanford and Arrigo in 2007 diagnosed him as a psychopath. So let's talk about psychopathy, my favorite subject. Psychopaths have a grandiose self-image. They're arrogant, aloof. Now, think of Hanssen in all of this. Thinks he's the best thinker, the best IT guy in the FBI, irresistible to women. His wife is the hottest babe in town. He has a bloated self-image. In fact, calls himself Ramon Garcia, like the Latin lover stereotype. He doesn't get the praise he thinks he deserves, and this increases his alienation and his antisocial tendencies. Psychopathy. Psychopaths are manipulative and deceitful. He lies to everyone. He pretends to be a pious Roman Catholic, but he has a taste for prostitutes. He's secretly employed by godless communists. He manipulates his wife, turns her into a porn star, manipulates his friend Jack, turns him into a voyeur. Psychopaths are control freaks. He's controlling his wife, his employers, his employees, Lichtenberg. He controlled Priscilla. He controlled the Soviets by withholding his ID and calling the shots. Psychopaths are reckless and impulsive. Racing his car as a teenager, breaking into university offices to change his grades, hacking FBI computers, copying documents on public machines in front of everybody, leaving wads of money lying around the house. Psychopaths crave recognition from others. He's certain he deserves it. He's super smart. He's efficient. He understands everything better. He advances slowly in the FBI because because he has no social skills. Nobody wants to work with him. Psychopaths lack remorse. And those are why they diagnosed him. His lawyer, a guy called Plato Kacharis, did a whole bunch of famous cases. I think Monica Lewinsky, if I'm not incorrect. He hires Alan Salarian, a Psychiatric Institute of Washington consultant to the FBI, and a guy who counseled agents after the fiasco at Waco. And he spent 30 hours with Hanssen, and he spent time with Bonnie and other relatives. He says that Hanssen is troubled by demons, that Hanssen felt horrible about the past and his mistakes, that he let people down, that he would accept any punishment, including death. He wasn't afraid. Kacharis replaces Salarian because Salarian goes public with all this, and he hires a guy called David Charney. Charney talks to Hanssen for 2 weeks. Charney talks to Hanssen twice a week for a year. And he has a mixed feeling about Hanssen. He thinks he's got good and bad things. The first thing that Hanssen brought up, and Charney says when he has a person he's working with, psychiatric work, he lets them start the first session because the first thing they bring up is usually the most significant. So take a while, guess what the first thing Hanssen wants to talk about is? His father. He said he was a tough cop, he belittled him, he didn't measure up, he humiliated him. Once he wrapped him in a carpet. It was a terrible story. So Charney felt that Hanssen thought that he was spying for the greater good, that he was a puppet master too, was part of it. He said he was giving Russia a proper view of America. He was rationalizing. He was trying to help Russians understand America. He was helping world peace, but he knew it was wrong. It was very complicated. He's more than just a monster. Hanssen told agents that he didn't know why he did it. He had no remorse. He just chose evil. Charney saw sincere regret once or twice. About Bonnie, he worshipped Bonnie. He was intensely attached to her. Charney says one word that would describe Hanssen is severe compartmentalization. It's done by design in the intelligence community. Doctors do it. You're on a need-to-know basis, and you compartmentalize information that doesn't go to other people. Most doctors that had overseen Hanssen were told by him that he had different domains in his head. Hanssen insisted that Charney meet with Opus Dei and, just compartmentalized. Jack told the author that she should watch Hanssen's favorite movie from 1970 called Investigation of a Citizen Beyond Suspicion, a foreign movie that won the Academy Award for films, for foreign films. It takes place in Rome. There's a homicide cop who kills his girlfriend and intentionally leaves clues all over the place, then goes to work, is assigned the case, and is able to use that as his excuse for why his hair and prints and that sort of thing are at the scene. Then he tapes a confession and writes a confession letter, and nobody will believe him because they just cannot believe that this famous homicide detective would kill somebody. I mean, come on. Finally, the police commissioner gets to the point. I will not permit you to insult our findings by disputing you. So the movie is absurdist, and Jack says that Hanssen is essentially at heart absurdist. Did Hanssen intentionally live on the edge, which is a very psychopathic thing to do, by dropping breadcrumbs of hacking and telling people and copying in public and letting people know and leaving money around? Was this a game of domination to see how far he could push it, how many hints he could leave? Chapter 25, Another Hanssen. March 2002, there was a 136-page report of the FBI review calling for tighter security of information, tighter security of personnel, tighter document security, a 70-page thing at the end of recommendations. They did 400 interviews. They had 4 meetings with Hanssen. As we were writing the Inspector's General report, I went online and saw to my great dismay that a number of commissions across the government had written similar reports, all of which pointed to similar deficiencies. That made me skeptical about the power of presidential commissions to induce significant change. The author asked the FBI and the CIA, can you imagine another Hanssen? And every single person, 100% of the people she asked said, yes, it's probably already happening. People commit crimes. They won't stop as espionage. Espionage is a crime. People will sell secrets. Jack Thompson, 30 years on the FBI, 17 years in counterintelligence, says there's no reason to believe there isn't recruitment in place right now in the FBI, the CIA, and the DOE. In 2016, the president doesn't... In relationship to that, Thompson says, in 2016, we have a president who doesn't identify the country that's recruiting spies as part of an evil empire anymore. Christopher Wray got rid of the FBI espionage section, the internal reporting. There's no way to gather the hints about a mole. There's no way to gather the evidence. There's a change in culture, so agents tell when they see someone take documents, supposedly, that's the rule, nobody does it. The FBI and the CIA have better relations now. Hanssen had played them against each other, so there is that positive thing. Charney says, spies trap themselves. They cannot quit. Why not create an amnesty program and let spies have an out to put an end to the spying? Today, we have far more foreign threats. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, the Saudis, Israel, Turkey, and then non-states, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the mafia organizations, the ideological entities, the hackers, the leakers. There are freelance secret brokers on the black market like Robert Maxwell and Epstein. They were selling secrets. They were spying for the spying agencies. They were spying for Mossad. They were spying for the KGB. There are also more targets: labs, private contractors, financial institutions, the power grid, the digital cloud. And there's more money to pay for moles. But they might not need money. Two of the most massive U.S. security leaks were for free. The U.S. Army intelligence officer Chelsea Manning gave classified documents to WikiLeaks related to the U.S. and the Middle East, and Snowden in the CIA was a subcontractor at NSA, and he leaked 1.7 million documents to The Guardian and other publications from the NSA and the Department of Defense. It's harder to find a mole when you don't have a money trail. They're never going to be able to protect every secret in the electronic age. Allies and partnerships are less reliable anymore in response to changes in the U.S. government, hint, hint, and its policies. U.S. intelligence is less trusted. In the late 60s, the RAND economist Daniel Ellsberg copied documents on the Pentagon and the Vietnam War and gave them in 1971 to the Times and the Washington Post. 15 years later, Hanssen took documents and later disks. And those were slow computers. She says today, this book manuscript is more than 300 pages, and it's on a thumb drive that I downloaded in a few seconds. Imagine what he could have done with that kind of computer technology. It's easier to steal secrets than ever before and go undetected. She spent some time with a secret intelligence guy who was an expert on forensics around this. And once you're in the FBI and the CIA, he said, you're trusted and you can do anything you want. Networks on the government are not secure like computer networks, not secure. The FBI, the CIA, the Pentagon, the White House have all been hacked. Snowden and Manning talked, and there's no official chain for classified information. They didn't feel there was anywhere else they could take it. They felt compelled. It was such bad dirt, and they had nowhere to go with it, which would explain one of the reasons why secrets were revealed. And then he talks about the private sector, the Department of Energy, the banking system. There are always guys like Hanssen to do the job that he did, that need access, and access creates vulnerabilities, and it's always a battle to protect secrets. It's a battle between convenience versus security, and, what's to prevent somebody from hacking the cloud. These government cybersecurity sites are going nuts. They're hiring people like crazy because they can't keep up with it. And the Russians and the rest of them are not going to stop. It's in their interest to disrupt our politics, change people's minds by putting out fake info, making it look so real that you change your mind about who you are going to vote for while you're on the way to the polling place. Her father, the writer's father, was in the FBI and had very strict rules when he was in the FBI. So once you put on the badge, you just simply do not cross lines. He was horrified by Comey, what Comey did. He says investigators are never supposed to determine the law. And he was horrified by Trump and Comey, that whole situation. The Trump Justice Department under William Barr's leadership went in exactly the opposite direction, lending its full weight to the proposition that the FBI is embedded part of the deep state. Thus, an honorable institution and many honorable men and women within it who carry the torch for law enforcement and save lives every day by helping keep our national secrets safe became yet another Twitter feed in Donald Trump's bent narrative of the nation he was elected to serve. Richard Nixon and his Attorney General John Mitchell, at their worst, were rookies at destruction compared to this. Trump and January 6th were bad for the FBI because the FBI defends the Constitution, takes an oath to defend the Constitution. And this gives people license to follow the dark angels of their psyche. And it endangers democracy. The end. I hope you like this book. It reads like fiction, like a movie. It's fast-paced. I skip things. It's well-written, easy to read. So entertaining. And I could not help thinking all the way through it what a fabulous movie it would make, and nothing would ever have to blow up. There would not have to be car chases, except maybe Hanssen racing his teenage car. Really a good book. So anybody out there has connections to Hollywood script writers, this is the book for you. So we'll read the cards on it, come up with some good questions about spies for me, my poor little brain, and I will be back soon. And in the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and Slánga Fóill and Sláinte.